Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines are unchanged. So, exam 1, quizzes part 2, October 19th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th. Okay, this should live in infamy. And then, of course, for the paper, the deadlines are for the draft. Last time to turn it in, November 9th. Again, the due date, I put a reminder announcement out. The due date was just put on there to say, if you really, really worried about your paper grade, it'd be a good idea to have a draft by then. But if you don't, what happens? Well, no. The critical date is November 9th, which is the last day to do a draft.
And when you send that draft in electronically or you hand it to you?
Hand it to me so I can put comments on it. Blackboard had a system before that was okay at draft commenting, and the new system is just terrible, which is sad. You think as a, well, I won't get into why a system supposedly designed for academics should have a good comment system. But that's not my version of yelling at people on my lawn. So, yeah, the final version though goes onto Blackboard. That way you can turn it in from anywhere at any time up until the deadline. And the +5 deadline, November 14th, plus the emergency deadline, November 21st, and of course the desperation deadline, December 8th. Before going to the new stuff, any stuff about past stuff or future stuff that needs more stuff. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in terms of where he belongs and the groupings. He's on the side that says, yeah, when it comes to trying to prove God, he's on the side of reason and logic. And then in the particular subcamp, he goes into that camp of the rationalists. So he believes that you can prove God by a priori reason. Now again, like all the rationalists, he also accepts that you can know stuff with empirical evidence, but the big battle between rationalists and empiricists is, can you prove that stuff exists by just, a priori reasoning, or does there have to be an empirical foundation? And likewise, empiricists do accept some forms of a priori reasoning, like triangles that have 3 sides, and 2 + 2 is 4, and logic, etc. They just claim you can't prove that stuff exists by pure logic. Now, as I mentioned before, many of the people who argue for and against God claim there are 3 types of arguments. The ontological, like we saw with the good, dead friend Anselm, the cosmological, as we saw with Aquinas, we'll see here again with Leibniz, and of course the argument from design or teleological. That way you got the illogical in all of them. So he advances here his own cosmological argument. And it's based, as you might imagine, on pure reason. So he thinks if you can just kind of sit there and it's a priori cosmological. So he thinks you can sit there, think about things, and then conclude from this there must be God. And so here's how it goes. As I mentioned before, Leibniz was a math and logic guy. And again, he's the guy who came up with the zeros and ones, binary logic. Think of just all the information, super stuff we've got today. So if you like Facebook and Instagram, say thank you, Leibniz. You hate it, say curse you, Leibniz. You've ruined us forever. So he claims that our reasoning has a foundation based on 2 things. And this is something that becomes part of philosophy going forward to today, or infects it, depending on how you feel about this stuff. Now, one principle is this. It's in logic known as the principle of contradiction. If you have logic or critical thinking, you got this notion. Now, in normal everyday life, we talk about people contradicting themselves, saying one thing, saying something else that can't be true. Now, a logical contradiction is something that is impossible to be true, that just by the logical structure, it must be false. So if we know something's a contradiction, we know that it must be false. We don't have to look, it can't possibly be true. And likewise, if you have the denial of a contradiction, then that must be true. Now in philosophy, the opposite of a contradiction, because contradictions are always false because of their structure. Something that is always true because of its structure is what's called a tautology. It's always true, and you don't have to look, you just know it's true. An example of a contradiction would be, well, easy to make it. You just take a claim and you conjunct it with its denial. So if you say, today is Wednesday and today is not Wednesday, and that's a contradiction because it's either Wednesday or not, so saying them both together, today is Wednesday and not Wednesday, must be false. Now, a contradiction doesn't tell you which part of it, like that particular contradiction doesn't tell you like which part is true or false, but the whole thing has got to be false. So something that is always false is a contradiction, based on its structure. In a tautology, the easiest way to make a tautology is take a claim and use a disjunction, or in English, and its negation. So if I say today is Wednesday or not Wednesday, that's always true. So no matter what day of the week it is, if you say today is Wednesday or not Wednesday, 100% right. So if you're not sure about something, just say it's true or not true. You'll always be right. Now, for the most part, everyone in philosophy and everyone who accepts logic accepts contradictions and tautologies. It's just basic logic. The second thing, more controversial. Leibniz claims that their second principle is what he calls his famous principle of sufficient reason, which was mocked in great detail. In fact, all this stuff is mocked in a book by a fellow named Voltaire. He wrote a book called Candide, which basically mocks Leibniz and the arguments that he gives. It's somewhat ironic considering that Voltaire is more famous than Leibniz, and because of the word Candide, so Voltaire became more famous than the person he's making fun of. Kind of weird, but there you go. And if you've ever read Candide or heard quotes from it, he makes special fun of sufficient reason. So what is sufficient reason for Leibniz? Well, it's this. He claims that for every claim that's not a contradiction or a tautology, there must be a reason why it is true. Or if it's false, there must be a reason why it's false. Now, in the case of contradictions, we know why they're false. They're always false because of their logical structure. And we know why tautologies are true. They're always true because of their structure. Now, we may not know the sufficient reason for something, but he claims that for every truth that is not a tautology, there's got to be a reason why it's true. And as you might imagine, not everyone accepts that. Now, because of this, he believes we end up with two kinds of truth. Now, thanks to alternative facts and people saying truth is not truth, I now feel obligated to say this. He's not claiming that something could be, true and also not true, because that'd be a contradiction. So when he says there's two kinds of truth, he doesn't mean you could have like something being true and also not true. He means that what may make a particular claim true could be one type of truth that's true, and then there are other types of truth that are true that are true for different reasons. So it's not that, again, something can be true and false. It'd be more analogous to saying that there are truths of like chemistry, which wouldn't be truths of like logic, but they're still truths, just a different area.
So kind of like something's true for one person, but it's not true for the next person?
Well, it could be, Leibniz say it could be true about a person, but things can't be true for a person. Okay. The difference is, for example, it's true of me that I'm wearing New Balance shoes. So it's true of me, but it's not true of you. Now, some people sometimes would say it's true for you, you're wearing New Balance. What they mean is it's true of me. The claim I'm wearing New Balances is true. And of course the claim I'm wearing New Balances, LaBossiere is wearing New Balances, is true for me, but it's also true for you because it's true. I'm wearing New Balances. Now there is a view, we looked at relativism and subjectivism. If someone is a subjectivist, then some things could be true for them. not true about them, but true for them. So if you believe the truth is relative to the individual, then you could accept that some truths are true not only about you, but true for you, and not true for other people. And that would be subjectivism. Like as a final example, like think of like taste in food. It's true about me that I like certain foods. It's true about you, you like certain foods. So I like waffles. So it's true about me I like waffles, but it's also, it'd be true for you that I like waffles because it's true, I do like waffles. Now if there were some truth that was only, you know, if reality, take morality, people often argue that morality is subjective. So it may be true for me that killing is wrong, and it may not be true for you.
So, okay, so back to the waffles thing. If we both like waffles, does that mean like it's true for me and for you, about me and?
Yeah, it'd be true about us that we like waffles. And of course it's true for both of us. If it's true that I like waffles, then it's true for me I like waffles. It's also true for you that, it's true for you that you like waffles. And so, in that case, it'd be objectively true. Now, to say true for something would mean that it's subjective. So, like, it could be true for you, but not true for somebody else. And like, for example, with morality or aesthetics, people argue that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, if that were true, the claim, say a particular person is beautiful, could be true for you, but not true for me, if it was subjective. So there are, for Leibniz, these two types of truth. And again, he's not claiming that, you know, things can be true for one person, not true for another. The first set of truths correspond to the contradiction in tautology. And he calls these truths of reasoning. And these would be a priori truths. Namely, you just sit down and think about them, and if you're thinking through things correctly, you would get to the truth. Now, in terms of their quality, he claims these are necessary truths. That means they can't be false. Or put more, you know, sort of metaphorically, they're true in all possible worlds. You know, these are the easy examples would be things like triangles have 3 sides, squares have 4 sides. If A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, A is bigger than C. You know, geometry, mathematics, logic. And pretty much everyone, you know, accepts that. These are true, they can't be false, so great. Now, where he ends up in some controversy, and this creates a controversy that haunts philosophy to this day, is he claimed that you could get to these truths by analysis. You would analyze, you know, like a concept and get to the truth. For example, if you take the triangle and analyze that, you'd end up with a 3-sided figure. And so that's what explains, in a way, the necessity, crudely put. It's kind of like, by definition, it's true. Now, while this is an appealing metaphor, again, it basically haunts philosophy like some sort of, you know, ghost, evil ghost for centuries. Because we do understand, like, analyzing, say, water. You know, one thing the city does is analyze the water supply to make sure it hasn't got, like, you know, too much lead. And of course, any lead is too much. You know, and so the chemicals are all right. And we understand that. You know, we know what it is for water to contain chemicals and so on, and analyze it. But it is quite a mystery as to what it would be to analyze a concept or do this analysis. Like, how do you analyze? In the case of triangle, it seems kind of appealing because, you know, you've got a definition of it. But what exactly does that mean? And these become later known as analytical truths.
So it's not really like a LaBossiere
oh yeah, this would be a priori reason.
The analyst.
Yeah, when he thinks by analysis, you could sit there, I mean, yeah, true, if you're doing analysis of water, you're investigating empirically,
Right.
but he thinks you could do like a mental analysis of like a concept, and you would get those truths. You know, like, well, like the example of like God, you know, you take the concept of God, you analyze it, and somehow you would get all the qualities of God. In a way, it's, again, it's like metaphor, like an analysis. It would give you like a list of ingredients that must be in there, but it'd be a mental analysis.
Not really like an experience type of thing.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be the case of that you go to an empirical investigation and like, you know, literally, you know, dissect it or run chemical tests. It's that you would analyze it by thinking about it. And by thinking about it, you would somehow reveal, you know, within the concept all this stuff. And the problem has been kind of like with the intuition thing is what does that, you know, what does that mean? How does it actually work? And so philosophers, since the time of Leibniz, have been fighting over that. What does analysis even mean? And then later on, it became like a big point of battle. And people still fight over it today. Now they do call Western philosophy, it's done like in America and stuff, analytic, as opposed to continental. But really no one has a really great account of what the difference is. Because some people in philosophy, I'm a continental philosopher. And aside from being like from the, but they can be American too. So I guess technically they're on a continent, we're all on a continent. But it's not clear exactly what that means. But this is kind of where it comes from. But his thought is you could somehow analyze these, analyze these concepts and get the truths. And so the idea is you could just kind of sit down and reason about stuff and get all kinds of truth. Now the second category of truth are those of truths of fact. For him, these are contingent, which means they could be true, but don't have to be true. They could go from being true to false. It's like the day of the week. That's a contingent truth. It's true it's Wednesday, but tomorrow won't be true that it's Wednesday. It'll be false. It's true that Trump is president, but he won't be president forever. So someday that claim will be not true. And as he sees it, he says it, these are things that are, possible. So they could be or don't have to be. So with the truth of fact, you kind of have to look to see if it's true. Again, going back to my silly example of the triangle, if I draw a triangle and put my hand on it and I say how many sides, everyone knows 3, because that's a necessary truth. It can't be a triangle without 3 sides. But if I ask, like how big is it or what color it is, you have to look, because that's a truth of fact, because a triangle has to have 3 sides, but they can be different sizes and different colors. So how does he get from this to God? Well, he runs, not surprisingly, a regress argument of a sort. So, in the case of truths that are contingent, things that could be but don't have to be, he claims there's got to be a reason, going back to his view of sufficient reason, for any claim that's true that doesn't have to be true, there's got to be a sufficient reason why it's true and not false. So, for example, like me being here, I didn't have to be, I could be somewhere else, although I wouldn't be paid for that. But there has to be a sufficient reason why I'm here. Or like in the case of Trump being president, he could have lost to Hillary. So there has to be a reason why he won. So anything that could be otherwise, Leibniz claims there's got to be a reason for this. Now he runs his infinite regress the following way. So suppose you take anything that's true, that's a contingent truth. There's got to be a reason why it's true. So the question would be like, why am I here? And one answer might be, I'm paid to be here. Well, one of the many reasons. And then the question is like, why are you paid to be here? Well, because in a capitalist system, people don't work without getting paid because you wouldn't have money. Without money, you would be out in the woods and you'd be eaten by bears and die. Why is that? Well, that's like, we talk about capitalism. And of course, for every, then you'd say, well, why do we have capitalism? Then you give a story of Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, why do we have that? And the story would keep on going. And of course, just like with the example of the evil bureaucrat in the form, if you explain everything with something else, but then that thing doesn't have to be true, you have to give a reason why that's true. To use a metaphor, think of like the kid who always asks why. Why is that true? Now, if everything's contingent, the kid can always ask why, because there has to be a reason why it's this and not something else. Like why is the sky blue? Well, it doesn't have to be blue. There are presumably skies on other worlds that aren't blue. Like the sky on the moon is not blue. So if you're standing on the moon, you wouldn't see blue. Yeah, I guess be really cold and super dead in that spacesuit. And so if you have a reason why it's blue, then the question, why is that the case? And this would go on to infinity. And as we saw, if there is an infinite regress, then you'd have nothing. Nothing would be here. So what we need is a final reason. Now what he brings out, not surprisingly, is God. Now God is a necessary substance. He has to exist. So he thinks, because of this, if you try to ask, why does God exist? The answer is because he's necessary, which means he exists because he must exist. It'd be like asking, why are triangles three-sided? That's like asking, why are three-sided figures three-sided? You can say the words, but the answer is right in the question. It's like, why are four-sided figures four-sided? Why is a bigger thing bigger than the smaller thing? Because it's a bigger thing. So if you ask, why does God exist? It's asking, why does a being that must exist exist? Yeah, the answer is right in the question. Now, there is, of course, the problem of, if God must exist, then he's got to be perfect, except for how can he do anything? There was a philosopher named, I mentioned before, Parmenides, who claimed there is no change. And if you accept that God is perfect, any change he made would be towards imperfection. So it would seem that God could never change. Because if you're perfect, the only way to go is down. God can't do that. So they came up with this notion called, to do something eminently. Not in the sense of being really, really good at it, because they also mean eminent, when we talk about someone being eminent in the field. In this case, we mean virtually. To use an analogy, if you really, really, really wanted to play, say, the old arcade games, like Pac-Man or Asteroids, one way you can do that, of course, is get a modern version, and just play it on a computer. But you can also get an emulator, which is a program where you can run the original program, and it acts virtually like that hardware, emulates that hardware on software. Another example is if you have a Mac computer and you want to run, OS 10, but you also want to run Windows programs, you can get a program like Parallels and run Windows in the Mac operating system. So you have a virtual computer. So your Mac computer is not a Windows PC, but it does everything the Windows PC can do. Just like if you have an emulator for those old video games, it can do all the stuff they did, but it's in a Mac or PC computer. And so one way to look at it is that God is changing virtually. He's running somehow an emulator where he doesn't really change, but he does all the stuff that change can't do. And then people look at that and say, that's a little crazy, because also isn't that change? Then they say, well, in computer terms, I guess they would say God is sandboxing that change. Because sandboxing is when you on your computer, it's a security thing where you run stuff inside a locked, area that hopefully stuff can't get out of. Hopefully. But it's a clever security thing. You can actually run your web browser some of them support sandbox mode, where all the terrible stuff that happens just eats up that part, and there's all kinds of crazy viruses. They just die in there, and you just turn that off, which is a good idea. Now, he closes by saying that God is a necessary being. Now, just like our good dead friend Anson, he wants to argue that not only God must exist, but you only need God. You don't need, like, this doesn't apply to anything else. And his argument is that, roughly put, God is sufficient, in the sense that he is the cause of everything, and you only need one God. You don't need any more. So to answer the question, like, why aren't there, like, lots of God? And his answer is, well, he's enough. You don't need any more God. So God exists, necessarily so, because otherwise there'd be nothing happening, and there's only one God. Now, one problem this scenario creates is the problem of evil. And the problem of evil is this. Super generically, here's the problem. God is supposed to be all good, all powerful, all knowing. But if God is all good, he would tolerate no evil. If he's all powerful, he can prevent all evil. And if he's all knowing, no evil can escape his sight. Therefore, if God is all good, all powerful, and all knowing, there should be no evil. But there is evil. Now, one conclusion would be, well, there is no God. Or the alternative conclusion is God exists, but he's lacking in some way. He's not all good, or he's not all knowing, or he's not all powerful.
Well, wouldn't that make him not God?
Maybe. Because, as my advisor used to say, he used to talk about the God of the philosophers, being all good, all powerful, all knowing. And if you go to actual, like, the Old Testament, the God of Judaism is not all good. Because all things, God says, quoting God, well, close to quoting God here, the claim is that all things good and bad come from God. So the God of the Old Testament is not all good. So why does bad stuff happen? Well, God brings it all. So Judaism has no problem with evil, because even if you accept that God is all powerful and all knowing, if you don't accept that he's all good, there's no problem. So he knows all the stuff, he does all the stuff, but he brings both good and bad. Now, the God of philosophers of Christianity is that he's all good, all powerful, all knowing. And that kind of creates the problem. So you could still have God, a different kind of God, and give up the all good. Now, some religions have two separate entities, where you've got a good, supreme good being and a supreme evil being. And so the supreme evil being is the cause of evil. And the devil of Christianity kind of reflects that. Well, the problem with Christianity is that God creates the devil so he could just, you got sick of the devil, it'd just be boom, see the devil. Or actually not see the devil, he'd be gone. Now, so how do you, if you want to keep God being all good, all powerful, all knowing, in account for evil, how can you do it? Well, Leibniz comes up with one of the best replies, very carefully considered response to the problem of evil. And it also gives him kind of his signature quote, and one that was mocked relentlessly in Voltaire's Candide. Leibniz claims that this is the best of all possible worlds. And it's a very quotable quote. It's quoted quite a bit in movies and stories and stuff. Now, what does that mean? Well, Leibniz, being smart, well, he's dead, but he was smart. Maybe he's still smart. He's an afterlife. He was well aware that you can't say that every single thing that happens is the best thing that you can imagine happening. Because if you look back at your life, you could say, well, yeah, that wasn't the very best, even small things. For example, if you order a burrito and they leave off the guacamole, although you pay for the guacamole and you get home, you're like, and that, of course, is not the best way things could go. The best thing would have been you've gotten guacamole. And yeah, so he doesn't claim that every single thing that occurs is the best, because clearly that would be absurd, because that's clearly not the case. So what can he mean? Well, what he means is this. If you take the entirety of the world, then the world that is the best world compared to all other possible worlds. So what does he envision? Well, he envisions, and I'll use a gaming metaphor. Have you ever played video games, even old ones, where you're picking a character to play? like the old, even like the old arcade games like Street Fighter, you pick your character. Or, you know, more modern games, you can really customize your character. Now, we can kind of imagine there's God using his, you know, his God station or God box or, you know, whatever God would use, whatever he call his video game. And he's scrolling through all the possible worlds. So every world he could create is an option in his menu. He's like, you know, going through it. Now, since God is God, he's good. So he wants to pick the best world, because anything else would be kind of neat. Being all-knowing, he knows which one is the best, so he doesn't have to go on like you know, a wiki site or YouTube or Twitch to go and see, you know, pro gamers, you know, give him advice, because he's God. You know, he knows all the perfect builds. Also, he's all powerful, so he can make it happen. And so what he does is, according to Leibniz, he knows every possible world he can make. He wants to make the best one because he's good. And he has the power to do so. So of course he makes the best world of all the possibilities. So there's an infinite number of worlds he could create, and this one is the very best. There is no better world. So then, even if you accept that story, the question arises, so what about the problems? You know, you can point to like famine, genocide, Zika, Ebola, you know, people leaving guacamole off your burrito, or putting it on if you hate guacamole. I just think it was like really weird guacamole. I thought it was like something terrifying, but it's just avocado ground up in the spices. Being a kid, so many things are scary. They really aren't that bad. Like zucchini, also terrifying, but not that bad. Zucchini is actually pretty good. It's only actually the past couple of years that I accepted zucchini. But anyways, back to diversity. So why are so bad stuff like guacamole if you don't like guacamole? Well, the answer is this. As we saw before, talking about you know, why there can only be one God. If God is perfect, then there can only be one God. Because you can't have two perfect beings because, well, one argument we saw was if they're both perfect, they're identical. So you've got one, not two. Also, going back to the metaphor, analogy of, you know, having all the money in the world, only one person can do that. Because if anybody else has even a penny, they don't have all the money in the world. So if God is perfect, he's got to have everything. So if there's anything other than God, it can't be perfect, because if it was perfect, it would be God. So the world has to be imperfect, because God can't create another God, because that would be, he'd be like, and it'd just still be him. Why is that not working? Oh, it's working. He just keep, you know, he just keep creating himself. It'd just be still one God. Now God, of course, Leibniz believes he must pick the best. So he's kind of locked into this because he's good, all-powerful, knowing, and he can't pick a crappy one. Now another reason why the world can't be perfect is because of Leibniz, you know, being a math guy, he's aware that, you know, when you take all the numbers, you can't have like gaps in them. You can't have like 7 missing, or like a hole at like 1,274,000,000, that there's no 1,275,000,000. And so you got to have all the stuff from 0 to God. And so you're going to get crappy stuff in there. Or so he claims. So someone may still raise the objection, so why can't God, like, just make it happen? Now, the very first time I taught philosophy as a grad student, I remember very well, it's still stuck in my mind. It was a class I was TAing for, so I was just a indentured servant working for a professor. She did all the lecturing, and I just went to try to explain things in a lecture. And we were talking about God, and you know, about God being all powerful. I remember there was a student who said, it's not enough that God can do anything that's possible, God has to be able to do the impossible. which I didn't realize at the time, but there is this debate about God's power goes way back to the medievals. And here's the distinction. So back in the Middle Ages, when people were not dying of plague, one of the things they thought about was questions like this. Can God create a rock he can't lift? And, then it's a question about God's power. When we say God is all powerful, what do we mean? Now, one camp became known as the intellectualist, not because they sat around, sipping lattes and, thinking they were really smart. They probably did. Well, probably not lattes, they probably invented by then. But they had the view that God's intellect was supreme. So God is limited by logic. So him being all powerful means he can do anything that can be done, but he can't do the impossible. So on that view, all powerful means anything that can be done, God can do it. Is that a thing that can be done? God can do that. Is that a thing that can't be done? God can't do that. Now, as I mentioned, for some people, including the student in my very first philosophy class centuries ago, probably after the Middle Ages, for her, that wasn't enough. She had a view, and I didn't realize at this time, but she was a voluntarist. And a voluntarist is not someone who, like, in this context, volunteers for stuff, doesn't show up and say, yeah, I'll help with that. It's someone who believes that God's will is supreme, that God can will anything, even the impossible. So if you say, is that something that can be done? God can do that. Is it something that can't be done? God can do that too. The literal impossible, I don't mean just things that are really hard to do, like doing taxes or scoring really well on the SAT, but impossible things. So God can make a triangle with 5 sides. Now, it's not that we would change the names of things. It's not, or he can make a triangle with 4 sides. It's not that we would call these triangles, is that 3-sided figures would have 4 sides. Now that's impossible, but God could do it. How could he do it? I can't even describe it because it's not even...
It wouldn't be a triangle.
But it would be. That's why it's impossible. That's why that's why many people are intellectualists, because they're like, yeah, not triangle. Because you have to make a triangle that's 4-sided but still 3-sided, which can't be done, except if God can do the impossible. Or making 2 plus 2 be 7. It's not that we call 4 7 now. It's not that we go 1, 2, 3, 7, 5, 6, 4. It's that 2 plus 2 would be 7. And of course we can't imagine how that would work, but again, the voluntarist says God can do the impossible. We can't understand how it could occur because we can't do the impossible, but he can. Now, so how does this tie into the problem of evil? Well, the gist of it for Leibniz, and we'll see in more detail later, is that God is limited in that regard. He can't do the impossible. He's bound by the laws of logic. And again, for some people, that's not enough. They say, no, God can't be bound by logic. So what is the problem of evil as he sees it? Well, the problem is, one version of this is accepting that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, but to say God's not good because the world is defective. There's bad stuff, from small bad stuff like inconveniences to really big bad stuff like genocide and earthquakes and tsunamis. Now he gives 2 pretty conventional replies, one very conventional reply and one kind of clever reply. Now, one standard reply to the problem of evil, I remember hearing it back in the day when I was in Sunday school, which is this. I mean, they didn't say, like, here's Leibniz's problem of evil and here's the counter, but basically this is, when they bring up, like, why does bad stuff happen, and, with God around, and one standard reply is the big picture. The idea being that if you look at something too closely, like if you take a picture of like a supermodel and stick it against your face, it's going to look terrible. But if you look at it from a distance, from the big picture, you'll see how beautiful it is. So the idea is if we focus too much on the small details, things will seem evil or ugly. But if we see the big picture, we'll realize that eventually, in other places and other times, things will work out. And people often, say God has a plan and everything's going to work out. So all the evil will be solved. And again, it's a standard big picture reply. There seems to be evil, but you're just looking too close. You have to step back and get a perspective. And one way that people often argue for this, not Leibniz, but is the idea that we just don't, know, because we don't see the big picture. For example, when parents drag their kids in for their immunizations, the kid is terrified. They're terrified because they're being dragged into this strange place and getting stabbed in the arm, and they think it's all terrible. They'd rather not do any of that. But then when they grow up and they don't have, polio and meningitis and measles and all those diseases, they're like, well, I guess that seemed terrible at the time, but it's actually good. And so ideas that eventually realize, yeah, sure, we get genocide and we have earthquakes and tsunamis and crime and murder, but we'll eventually realize, oh, that was all for the best. Now, as you might imagine, people are kind of critical of that, because if you look at the Holocaust and say, gosh, it's sure that happened, but it's not really that bad because it's all going to work out, and telling someone who's children have just been murdered, no, it's fine, it's all going to work. This is better this way than they were murdered. That's not going to go over well. So yeah, there is a certain kind of problem with trying to tell people, yeah, the horrible thing that just happened, no big deal. It's all going to be. So you'll be a better person because of that. You'll be glad that your kids were murdered. Yeah, see, that seems terrible. Now, a second reply, which is a pretty clever one, is that things may not seem perfect to us because the problem is that the world is not just for us. To use a kind of a contemporary analogy, like the temperature for this room. If you're in a public area, they have to set the temperature at something. And what they try to do is pick a temperature that is, kind of like average, not too hot for most people, not too cold. But of course, some people may find it too warm, some people may find it too cold. But the problem is, of course, the room is not made it's not like my room, so it's not set to the temperature I like, it's not your room. It's not set to the temperature you like, it's set to the temperature that statistically is supposedly like everyone can kind of tolerate. Similar like the color of the room. It's not painted the way you like or the way I like, but they pick a paint scheme that everyone can tolerate and say, yeah, it's not, I'm sure that someone likes it. But for the most part, it's it's a nice neutral beige. No one really hates beige. Well, eventually you start hating beige. Eventually you start really hating it. But initially you don't. And you just kind of and they actually design most products the same way. The color that least offends people. And they offer you can sometimes customize it a little bit. And with a can of spray paint, you can kind of customize everything. Now, one problem, of course, he ends up with potentially here is, since he says the world is like the very best, his concern is he ends up with that scenario that Spinoza was talking about, because he comes after Spinoza. Spinoza took the perfect thing pretty seriously. He said, okay, if God is perfect, then only God can exist. Because if anything existed outside of God, God would be lacking something, he wouldn't be perfect. So everything is God. And that, of course, is called pantheism. The idea that everything is God. Not like in a metaphorical sense, in a very literal sense, just like all the cells that make up your body, they make up you. They're all part of you. Likewise, we're metaphorically all cells in God's body. So there's nothing apart. There's just God. There's nothing outside of God. Now, for almost all Christians, actually pretty much everyone who's a monotheist, pantheism is crazy and a heresy. So don't want to get into that. So Leibniz wants to have a perfect God, and he recognized that a perfect you know, he recognized Spinoza's, you know, style of reasoning, perfect being there can only be one, so it means there's only God. And what he does is this. He claims that the world is infinitely divisible, that there is no smallest part. Now, one question goes back to our good day friend Thales, is the question of, is there like one basic thing that makes up everything? That if you had a metaphorical sword that could cut anything, that could be cut, eventually you would cut and cut and cut, and you'd hit something that cannot be cut, the most basic thing that cannot be broken. Now, Leibniz says there's no such basic thing. You could keep cutting forever, for infinity. So the world is an infinity. And he claims, using a little bit of mathematical jujitsu, that infinity cannot be considered a single being. Why? Well, if you take the infinite number, is that infinite number odd or even? Yeah, you can't answer it, because infinity claims it's not a whole. So he essentially says, yeah, you can't take the universe to be one thing, so he concludes that God is not the universe, there's God, and the universe is separate. So the universe is not like an animal or a substance, so you can't have pantheism, which is kind of a really roundabout way of trying to do it, but you can see with all the work he put into it, how much he really hated pantheism, because it's considered super crazy. Well, because it ends up basically destroying conventional religion, because there's just God, but we're part of God. So the whole idea, all ideas of like sin and so forth don't make any sense anymore. Heaven, you know, doesn't make any sense. Hell doesn't make any sense. And so pretty problematic. So just saying that. Okay, so Friday, of course, homecoming.